Today, we're introducing the iPod.
iPod, the first revolutionary product that brought Apple into play as a company after disastrous financial results of the 90s. Its design became iconic and scroll wheel legendary. Apple solved the problem of navigation and scrolling on a tiny little screen, and that was a big deal. But where did the scroll wheel come from? Who came up with this idea? Many believe that Dieter Rams' T3 Pocket Radio influenced the iPod design because it had the scrolling wheel and it had that cigarette pack form factor, but Apple inspiration actually came from a different place. In 2000s, just about every MP3 player that came before iPod had those goofy buttons and proprietary controls, and nobody knew how to figure out how to use those things because manufacturers desperately were trying to muscle their way into the crowded market, and they brought all the terrible designs with them. Apple's team wanted to do something different. Before the first iPod came out, Bang & Olufsen Danish company introduced Beocom 6000, which was a wireless phone designed by Henrik Thomsen. It had a navigation wheel to give speedy access to practical features like a phone book. And B&O, they've been using WheelTAC for a long time because they really like the fact that all the primary functions can be carried out using the wheel and the keys that surround it. But one of the big things that Beocom 6000 did really well is that it used sound to echo the wheel's turns. And the company has experimented with various materials in order to produce the hardware audio when the wheel was turning, but tech people, being tech, they came up with the sound coming from a loudspeaker, and that's exactly what Apple adopted with their iPod and their scroll wheel. And the person to introduce this phone was Phil Schiller, who was in charge of marketing. And when he demoed the Beocom 6000 phone, the reaction from the Apple team was, wow, this instantaneously solves the problem. And Schiller worked with Steve Jobs for years, but he was the least technical person on the team, only understanding the basics, yet his perspective was so invaluable because he represented the normal users, normal people who would be using Apple's products. And the first iPod had a mechanical scroll wheel that later was replaced with different variations, but it all changed in 2004 in January when Apple introduced iPod A1051, also known as iPod mini.
We are going to introduce the second member of the iPod family today.
It showed users a new, simpler way of navigation on a tiny screen, and it quickly became the pinnacle of iPod design. In fact, Apple never changed it all the way until they discontinued iPod lineup altogether, or when they designed the iPod Nano.
You ever wonder what this pocket's for? Well, now we know, because this is the new iPod Nano.
It was simple, uncluttered, and it was super easy to use regardless how familiar you were with tech. And in the world where now we actually have to pay attention to our devices constantly, you could use it without even looking at it, which is, in this time, is pretty cool. And that's the story where iPod scroll wheel came from. If you guys like this story, consider liking it and subscribing for similar stories like that on the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.